Hey, it's Rory with searchandchow.com, and yesterday was the launch of yet another set of super good value for money smartphones by a sub-brand that spun off from a main brand. Only thing this time, the main brand that the sub-brand spun off from isn't super well known for making super good value for money smartphones. Confused? Well, you don't have to be. All you need to know is that there are 3 brand new mid-range super good value for money smartphones coming your way. They're called the Realme series, and here is everything you need to know about it. Let's start at the top with the Realme 2 Pro. This is sort of like the flagship of this series, and it has a lot of the hallmarks for a really good bang for buck smartphone. All of that starts with a Snapdragon 660 processor at its heart, which you can then pair to 3 different memory configurations. You can have it with 4 gigs of RAM and 64 gigs of internal storage. You can have it with 6 gigs of RAM and 64 gigs of storage, or you can opt for the top spec variant with 8 gigs of RAM of LPDDR4X memory actually, and 128 gigs of UFS 2.1 storage. So this phone should be pretty speedy. Keeping everything running is a 3500 mAh battery, which is okay for the size, but unfortunately it doesn't look like it has any form of fast charging beyond the normal 5V2A, and it charges via micro USB, which is a little bit of a bummer. Up front, it's got a 6.3-inch Full HD Plus IPS display, which works out to about 408 pixels per inch, which is pretty good. And it also has really slim bezels, but there is a tiny little water drop notch at the top that is very similar to the one on the Oppo F9. This time they're calling it the dewdrop notch, but I mean, come on, the resemblance is uncanny. But that is a pretty good thing for notch haters because the notch is really small and very unobtrusive, so you should be able to ignore or get used to it pretty easily. For photos, you're getting a dual camera setup at the back with a 16 megapixel main sensor that's paired to an f1.7 aperture lens, so that looks pretty good on paper. And there's also a 2 megapixel secondary sensor for depth information and portrait mode photos. Up front, in that tiny little notch, is a 16 megapixel selfie shooter with an f2.0 aperture lens that has a whole host of AI beautification features that, get this, can analyze the age, gender, and skin complexion of each person in a selfie or WIFI and then adjust settings accordingly. The phone itself, though, isn't without its compromises, and the first one is its body, which, as far as I can tell, is made mostly out of plastic. It looks like glass, though it feels a lot like plastic, and one of the models that I had at the demo zone was actually all scuffed up already, so I don't know how long that will last under duress or like normal usage situations. I would definitely slap a case on that phone if I was going to use it as a daily driver. But I would say that Realme has done a great job with prettying up the phone so it doesn't look like a cheap device, because if you hold it at a distance or even if you hold it in your hand, it doesn't feel cheap. It has a pretty nice hand feel for a phone at this price point, and it looks like one of those glass and metal sandwiches that you find occupying the top end of the market. Besides the arguably upmarket look, it does retain a lot of the nice mid-range features that you like. For example, a 3.5mm headphone jack, as well as stuff like 802.11 AC Wi-Fi and Bluetooth 5.0 connection. There is also a dedicated MicroSD card slot, so it's a triple SIM tray setup, so you can have 2 SIMs in, 2 nano SIMs in, as well as a MicroSD slot for maximum expansion and connectivity, which is pretty great. Of course, there's also a fingerprint scanner at the back, and it is at a pretty comfortable position, so no complaints there. But this phone also supports face unlocking, and it works pretty well from what I can tell, though I haven't really spent a lot of time with the phone yet. But the good news is I actually have one right here, so I'll definitely be checking it out more in depth. I will be giving you my first impressions in the next video, along with stuff like camera samples and, you know, what the experience is like. So definitely stay tuned for that. But for now, these are all the features that you need to know about this smartphone. Oh yeah, except the price. So it actually hasn't launched in Malaysia yet. It just launched in Indonesia, and if you convert the prices, it's actually really attractive. So the base model with 4 gigs of RAM and 64 gigs of storage retails for about 790 ringgit, which is pretty good. And then you've got the mid-spec one with 6 gigs of RAM, 64 gigs of storage, that retails for just under 900 ringgit. And then you have the top spec variant with 8 gigs of RAM, 128 gigs of storage. That one is retailing for just over 1,000 ringgit. So that is actually crazy good value for money. So definitely an interesting phone that I want to check out, and one that could potentially compete with something like the Pocophone or the Mi A2. So I'm definitely looking forward to that. Moving down the series, you have the more affordable Realme 2, and it's pretty similar to the Realme 2 Pro, except for the fact that it isn't quite as powerful. So for the processor, instead of a Snapdragon 660 chip, you're getting a Snapdragon 450 chip, and it's also paired to 2 slightly smaller memory configurations. So you have the base model with 3 gigs of RAM and 32 gigs of storage, and you have the top spec which has 4 gigs of RAM and 64 gigs of internal storage. So those are pretty watered down, but you do get a much beefier, bigger battery, which is rated at 4,230 milliamp hours, which is awesome, but it still charges via microSD, though this smartphone is more affordable, so I guess that's not surprising. Up front, you've got a 6.2-inch display that is, I mean, not that much smaller than the Realme 2 Pro, but the biggest sacrifice here is resolution, where instead of a full HD plus resolution, you're getting just a HD plus resolution. But the upside for that is better battery life, of course, paired with that 4,000 mAh cell. For photos, you're still getting a dual camera setup at the back, though this time the main sensor is a 13 megapixel sensor instead of a 16 megapixel sensor, but it still has a 2 megapixel secondary sensor for depth effects and portrait mode photos. Up front, you also get a slightly downgraded selfie camera, which is now just 8 megapixels, but it also has AI beautification, so you still have that skin tone and fairing features if that's what you like. Though the biggest difference between these two smartphones has to be the build. So while the Realme 2 Pro still had a nice sort of premium heft to it, this one is considerably lighter. The Realme 2's plastic bits also feel a lot more plasticky, I would say, but it does make up for that with some pizzazz, because the back of the phone has this diamond cut design that is really trippy to look at, especially if you hold it up against the light. It's like bling bling bling. So if you like that kind of thing, then you'll like this phone a lot. But of course, this cut in specs also comes with a cut in price, and the Realme 2 is a lot more affordable than the Realme 2 Pro. The base model, for example, with 3 gigs of RAM and 32 gigs of storage comes up to about just under 550 ringgit if you convert directly, while the top spec with 4 gigs of RAM, 64 gigs of storage, that comes in at just over 650 ringgit. So that's actually a pretty good price point considering the specs. Finally, if the Realme 2 is still a little too pricey for you, you can always opt for the Realme C1, which isn't part of the Realme 2 series, but is still a new Realme phone, and it is the most entry level of the three. So despite the fact that it is that entry level, it still stacks up pretty well to the Realme 2. For example, the processor is still a Snapdragon 450 chip, and it still has a 6.2-inch HD plus display up front, though it does have the slightly bigger notch of the Realme 2 rather than the really tiny notch of the Realme 2 Pro. However, memory configuration takes a hit, because now you only get it with 2 gigs of RAM and 16 gigs of storage, though you can expand that further via a microSD card. For photos, you're still getting a dual camera setup at the back, so you have a 13 megapixel main shooter with a 2 megapixel secondary shooter for depth and portrait effects, but the front camera is now just a 5 megapixel shooter, but you still get AI beautification features and all that stuff. However, connectivity also takes a hit, as this smartphone does not support 5 GHz Wi-Fi. So if you're someone who uses 5 GHz Wi-Fi a lot, then this is going to be quite the bummer for you. Oh, and this smartphone also doesn't have a fingerprint scanner at the back, but it does support face unlock, so that's your only option for biometric unlocking. But of course, being the most entry-level smartphone, the Realme C1 also has the most affordable price tag, and if you convert it directly, this smartphone retails for about 410 ringgit, which puts it at a really good price point. And that's it. That's all you need to know about the brand new Realme phones that were launched in Indonesia. I have no word on when they'll be launching in Malaysia, except for the word soon, which could mean anytime in the next couple of months, but you should expect to see it hit our shelves pretty soon, and we'll update you as soon as we know anything. But yeah, for now, tell me what you think about these smartphones. Do you like them? Do you think that they're disruptive enough for the market? Let me know in the comments below. And of course, if you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and click on the little notification bell icon so you don't miss any one of our new videos. Like us on Facebook and keep your browser locked to searchinshaw.com for the most refreshing servings of tech news. I'm Rory, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!